Girls, as you can see from the intro, we got a very special guest in the building. Future Hall of Famer, Cleveland Brown legend Joe Thomas is in the building. He's here to talk all things Browns. We'll get to Deshaun Watson. Obviously, everybody excited to see what he's going to offer. We'll get to his protege. Everybody's a protege if you play left tackle in the league. Jedrick Wills, we'll talk about his play. We'll talk about offensive line. And one of the couple of things that the Browns do excel at is offensive line play. And what makes Bill Callahan so good? We'll talk about that. And then obviously you get an opportunity. We may definitely get to some of your questions that you may have from Joe. We'll talk about that as well and get into this game plan for the Cleveland Browns against the Houston Texans. Jam-packed, legendary show coming up here on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound, LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We appreciate all of you who make Locked On Browns your first listen, whether it is on your favorite podcast app, here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, notifications on, and of course, throw a like on the episodes for us, guys. Just helps with promotion and the growth of the show. You guys have been so fantastic about it. We greatly appreciate it. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, at Jeff_LJ_Lloyd. Also from the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, the Barbershop 92.3, The Fan, Saturday mornings, other appearances as well. Pre-game, post-game coverage for your Browns, your Buckeyes, your Cavaliers, and when the time comes, the Cleveland Guardians. Mr. Garrett Bush at GBush91. Very excited here, joined today. And I guess it's a day where Joe felt like putting some work in, so he's been all over the place. Obviously, big stories with Wisconsin. A lot going on this week as the Cleveland Browns embark on, for me, what should hopefully be the sunniest of days for this franchise ever. Now, Joe, I think there's some confusion here with people trying to distort Deshaun Watson, the person, with Deshaun Watson, the player. Look, we have to talk about what we can talk about, what our job is to talk about, and that is Deshaun Watson, the football player. I think, and I've talked with some people this week, doing some spots, Jacoby Brissett, yes, it was a fantastic story. But Joe, if anybody knows, we don't need good stories anymore. We need elite quarterback play. We want extended January and possibly February runs. What does it truly mean for this franchise to have a player this talented at this type of position, to pair with a Nick Chubb, to pair with a Myles Garrett, and hopefully, stake their claim not only in the AFC, but in the entire NFL?
Yeah, Jacoby Brissett endeared himself to all of Browns Nation. There's no doubt about it. He exceeded expectations when we brought him in here to kind of hold water until Deshaun Watson came back this week against the Texans. He did a wonderful job as a leader. He held himself as a professional, did a great job understanding what his role was. And I think people in Cleveland could identify with him, the player, the person, and that is fantastic. But this whole season was about, let's get to the point when Deshaun Watson comes back, because he's the future of the franchise. There's a reason that you brought him here. You spent so much of your capital from a draft standpoint, from a salary cap standpoint, to bring him here. And then from a brand standpoint, taking the hit of bringing in a guy that was going to be suspended for things that happened off the field. But those are things that we've discussed for the last 9+ months ad nauseum. And now it's time to talk about Deshaun Watson, the quarterback of your football team. He'll be starting his first game in almost 2 years against his former team, the Houston Texans, this weekend. And we finally, as Browns fans, get an opportunity to see what this offense and what this team can look like with Deshaun Watson, who the last time we saw him on a football field was one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. He's a guy that can do everything. He can throw from in the pocket. He can dice you up in the 2-minute offense. He can play a more methodical approach where you're going to run the football, you're going to run play action, you're going to allow him to get outside the pocket, to win with his legs, to challenge defenses, and to make him defend every blade of grass. And I think that's what's made Browns fans so excited to see him out there, to see what the potential of this team can be.
Well, Joe, I will say that, this is what we came to look for. This is exactly what the Cleveland Browns wanted. This is exactly the time where Cleveland Browns fans could be a little more excited about what this team could be. I think guys have kind of forgotten a little bit what kind of player Deshaun Watson is. Now, granted, there is some rust, and we maybe talk about that later on in the interview. But in terms of people who haven't seen Deshaun Watson or haven't been in contact or maybe didn't watch the Texans that often, what is the skill set that is going to jump off first for you as watching Deshaun Watson and kind of letting people know what type of ball player he is?
Well, I think it's his ability to make off-schedule plays. That's what made it so special when he first came into the NFL. Because I remember watching him early on in his career, and he hadn't quite figured out, like most rookie quarterbacks, how to read the defense, how to dissect the defense and win within the pocket. And so he would take off, and all of a sudden you saw the athletic ability. You saw what made him so popular and famous in college football was that ability to get outside, to make people miss in space, and then also not just do the Lamar Jackson where you're winning running the football down the field, but to make guys miss and then to throw the football down the field, hit those receivers in the scramble drill. I think that's what's going to be the most valuable asset that Deshaun Watson brings because, like you mentioned, he's going to be a little bit rusty. So I don't think we're going to expect him to sit there and go through 2-3 reads every single time he drops back to pass because he's just not going to have that timing with those receivers right off the bat because of his rust and because he just hasn't played with these guys yet in a regular season game. So I think when he gets outside the pocket, when he makes people miss and it turns into a scramble drill, that's when you're going to see the truly special physical attributes that Deshaun Watson brings to this offense.
Joe, we've seen some nice, growth here, I would say, this year from David Njoku getting comfortable from being maybe a guy who was thought highly of. Now you put that number on a player, you get viewed differently, obviously, as far as what you make. Donovan Peoples-Jones, the growth here. I mean, there's a chance Donovan could sniff 1,000 yards this year, which would be amazing for that young man in his third season. Is there any one particular person on offense that you think becomes even more vital with Deshaun coming in here? Maybe just somebody, from what we've seen to this point, that maybe the rapport should be good there with number 4 here. And I do agree with you on the one thing. And the one thing, I loved about Jacoby is he was comfortable with who he was. But you watched that Sunday night game last week, and they talked about we're at this weird stage in the NFL now with quarterbacks where we have more really athletic quarterbacks than we do non-athletic quarterbacks. So for Deshaun, things should just happen at a faster pace. Certainly not going to be out of the gate, of course, but any one player here that you think maybe becomes a little bit even more of a weapon because number 4 is now in that huddle.
I think it's Donovan Peoples-Jones, actually, the guy that you mentioned. He's had a tremendous season. You've seen him grow. You've seen his ability to make contested catches and how important that can be in big moments in a game. And I think with Deshaun Watson's ability to make off-schedule plays, to get outside the pocket, to make potential sackers miss, and then hit guys down the field in the scramble drill, with Donovan Peoples-Jones's ball skills and his ability to win some of those 50-50 balls, I think you're going to see a lot of that with Deshaun at quarterback because those are the type of passes that come up a lot when people are in the scramble drill and you got guys kind of all over the field and defense is scrambling to try to cover guys. Deshaun's going to build, in my opinion, a really nice rapport with Donovan Peoples-Jones in those situations because of the trust he's going to gain early on because of his ability, Donovan's ability to go up and catch the football in traffic and come down with it in those big moments, those third downs, those 2-minute drives. And so that's one thing that's really exciting for me to see Donovan even take another step in his progress as an NFL receiver.
Joe, before we go to break, could you do us a favor and unplug your mic and plug it in again? They said there's a little bit of a static. We'll see if we can get that fixed. We should be good here, ready to go.
It's funny. It's usually me.
It's usually you, right?
I haven't seen one comment. They're all afraid to call out Joe on that, though.
That works.
Yeah,
we'll go to break and then come on back, and then we're
going to switch it up here. We're going to go a little bit here. We're going to talk a little bit of the offensive line. I've actually been talking with Joe a lot this year, back and forth about Jedrick Wills. But we've got to see a lot of things happen here with the offensive line this year. Some guys in, some guys out. And a lot of it kind of revolves down to, one main personality who, obviously does so much for that offensive line. So we're going to get to that with Joe here. We'll take a question or two here at the end when we have Joe. I'm sure somebody probably maybe wants to ask about Wisconsin or something else here. There's lots going on in Joe's life these days. We're going to get back to that here. Jeff Lloyd, Garrett Bush, and as my daughters refer to him, oh, is that the beer guy? Yeah. Joe Thomas. Yeah. A little bit more than the beer guy, but wow. Sure, girls. Why not? Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. Book an SUV or a minivan for a family road trip, a pickup truck for some errands, or even test drive an EV. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Guys, I need to tell you about Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. Find Block Forever now wherever you get your podcasts, as this episode is brought to you by Audible. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. Ryan and guests discuss topics like the player's psyche, sports betting, playing through pain, being a leader, and how to deal with combative teammates. Here, there's nothing out of bounds. It's available for free on Audible or wherever you get your podcast. Catch the Block Forever series, available anywhere where you can get your podcasts, available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game.
Welcome back to the Locked On Browns podcast. G. Bush, Jeff Lloyd, and Joe Thomas, the Hall of Famer, Cleveland Browns football legend. He's on the route Mount Rushmore, by the way. If you don't have Joe Thomas on your Mount Rushmore, Cleveland sports, you're playing yourself. Obviously, it is what it is. And you would not know about this if you did not subscribe to the channel. If you hit that subscribe bell, hit the notification bell, you would know that Joe Thomas is on with us today. And you will see cool guests like this on Locked On Browns. So continue to support us wherever you download your podcast. As well on YouTube, you can catch new episodes every single day. And don't forget the 2-minute warning following every single Browns, at the 2-minute warning for every Browns post-game show. We've had some doozies. The last week we went into overtime. You got to hear us call it out. We got a chance to do that. So continue to support us, and you can get that good content as we always deliver out. Joe, we talked, a little bit about Deshaun Watson, what his skill sets are, what he brings to the table. One area for the Browns that they really excel at is the offensive line and running the football. I've always wanted to know, before we get to Jedrick Wills, what makes why is Bill Callahan such a great offensive line coach, right? What makes him a great line coach? Because a lot of times offensive line play is like Jedi stuff. Like, you got to go to a Jedi temple. They'll teach you footwork. But when it comes to like really blocking and pass blocking and learning how to be, big, strong, and run the football and protect the quarterback, those things are lost arts. What makes Bill Callahan such a great offensive line coach where his teams seem to always perform well up front?
Well, I think it's his attention to detail, because when you look at offensive line play, the reason it's so specific, and you rarely see guys go from coach, running back coach, offensive line coach, like positions on the team, that it's very specific. Motion from offensive line coach to anywhere else, but usually those guys are the most highly paid assistant on the entire specific skills that you're learning and you're teaching are offensive line play, and there's hardly any carryover and individualized technique and scheme that you have to learn. If you think about an offensive lineman's job, when they're run blocking, they're moving forward like a duck, and it's a bit of an awkward developed through drills and repetitions, and it's pass blocking is even worse because you're going backwards. Everything else on a quarterback, he throws the ball. We've been throwing balls, baseball, a softball, a football. You're born with that. When you're running, you've been doing that. Running and catching, those are just natural things, but you're running backwards. That's not something that you do in play offensive line for the first time. Oh, by the way, as you're running as deep, as fast as you can go, you have to stop on a dime, twice as athletic as you, and probably just as definitely just as powerful as you are, and you have to step up more than a yard of ground, or you're in the quarterback. So these skills are very unique, and they have to be developed. So special is his understanding of all the different techniques, attention to the detail of those techniques, his practice, the way he has structured the drills, those drills, and then when they go out and play the game, he's very good at reflecting back what needs to change to those players that are out there running those techniques during a game. He improves. So then over time, as he's had guys, really good offensive linemen, and they understand how they fit on that offensive line. So that was a long answer, but there's a lot that goes.
Joe, Jedrick Wills, this is a guy that we have talked about, back and forth a lot this year. And I think there's times where Jedrick Wills looks like he's, solidified maybe as a solid tackle in this league. But then there's times where, there's a miss and everything seems to get magnified. And I think, especially as you said, with the athleticism, when you see this and you see a player like Jedrick Wills, where is the true evaluation of Jedrick Wills at this point now, more than 2.5 years in the league?
His best football in year 3. I thought year 2, and a lot of that was because of the ankle injury he was dealing with in and out of the route, comfortable. Certainly there's plenty of growth that needs to happen. Now, if he wants to become that, he's got the potential to be. But I've seen this when he struggles. I think it's when he's not sure of, and everybody learns the position at a different speed. In year 1 and becomes an all-pro or a Pro Bowl, or even a high draft choice. It takes time, but I think urging is steady growth. And as he continues to his own offense, and how he fits within the units in those blocking schemes. And then as he starts to understand and how they're trying to attack him, he's going to be able to remove. He's a little unsure of himself. And naturally, he's a guy when he kind of pulls back a little bit. And then that's when you see the people on, oh, he doesn't look like he's giving effort here. Well, because he's due. And so he's pulling back because he doesn't want to be jumping into his guard's leg that's running into the quarterback because he doesn't know where he needs. And I'm not saying that that's a good quality, but that's just the reason why I'm so optimistic about his future still is because really good opportunity, especially with the great coaching from Bill Callahan. Those situations where he's not exactly sure what he has to do, the amount of mistakes that he's making throughout the course of the game produced. And I think the hard thing is when you're a high in the social media era, which I didn't have to deal with as a rookie, right? Instagram when I was a rookie. So if I had 4 or 5 people couldn't pull those out and run a highlight reel of all and then say, hey, look, he stinks, right? Which is unfortunately in the NFL have to deal with right now, right? If somebody like me, for instance, if I staked my claim that, and then every time he makes a mistake, I pull that out, and that's all you see on social media, of course you're going to think he stinks. And because you probably haven't played the position that over the course, very few players, only the elite of the elite, 5 or 10% of the guys that are even all pro every year having nearly perfect games. It took me like 5 or 6